As we've seen, there's a lot that can be determined from even a single Homeric hymn. So in looking at the hymn to Apollo, for instance, we were able to notice a variety of things about ancient Greek religion. One of the things we noticed about this religious discourse is the fact that it's not organized so much by virtue and vice, as is so prominent in Judeo-Christian traditions, but rather by broader concepts like order and disorder. The concept of the theogony, or the birth of the god, for instance, tries to place a god within a certain system of order. Which powers will he have? Whose rights will he threaten? Whose rights will he not threaten? Those are kind of those larger concepts. The other thing we notice is how much this religious discourse is interested in the real and observed world. And it can either be directly ideological, that is to say that it explains the causes of certain things, but also it just seems to be taking place within that kind of a real universe rather than kind of an abstract world. And I sort of put the term up mimetic there as a broad way of describing that. Mimetic refers to imitation, and we use it to kind of indicate connections between the world and other systems, whether that's religion or in some cases literature. So we say literature is mimetic if it tries to represent the real world. The other thing, and this is so obvious that it sometimes goes without saying, is how many-sided this religious discourse is. There are many gods and goddesses. Technically, this is polytheism, the worship of many gods. But what we noticed from looking at the hymn to Apollo is that despite the fact that Apollo has certain powers or control over certain things, the hymn doesn't address Apollo primarily as the representative of those things. Instead, it seems to be simply saying, I'm, praising you, Apollo. Apollo, you are wonderful. You are the god. And modern scholars have referred or sort of coined this paradoxical term to refer to this kind of process by calling the Greek religion serial monotheism. That is to say, it's the worship of one god, and then another god, and then another god, but at any given time, a single god is being worshipped, so that they're not being taken as kind of representatives of like special powers. If you lose an object, you don't pray to a specific god to get that object back. Instead, you attend a festival where you praise a particular god, and for that moment when you're in that ceremony, that god is the god. The other thing we noticed is how local and communal all this is. There are specific festivals, and they are tied to specific geographical locations, and the festivals themselves are the ways by which these gods are addressed. So the hymns are these oral performances which were connected with particular festivals. So that means that the worshiper is defining and instantiating the god through the worship of the god. And that worship is always very local and very communal. The god doesn't stand sort of outside of that local community. Finally, thinking about those festivals, we notice that this religious discourse is highly experiential and performative. Most religions have an experiential and performative aspect, but a lot of religions have things like sacred texts and doctrine and theology, and this is a religion that doesn't seem to have those things. There is no single sacred text. There may be oral hymns, but those hymns are really a record of a performance. There's no authorized doctrine. You don't have to believe a certain set of things in order to participate in this religious discourse. Instead, there's this heavy emphasis on what modern theologians would call liturgy, which is the form and formula of public worship. So if you attend a religious service, you go through a series of sort of motions or events within that ceremony. That's the liturgy. In the ancient Greek religion, that's the main thing that happens. Finally, and this is something that we can't really derive from looking at the hymn to Apollo itself, so this is brand new, and I'm just going to throw this out there for you. But one other thing that we notice happening within this religious discourse is that more recent kind of political things are creeping in. So one of the reasons we even have the hymn to Apollo, which was composed 700 BCE, roughly, is that in the 5th century, there was a revival of this particular the worship of Apollo. And that revival was connected with a very, very politicized event, which is the creation of the Delian League. And Athens, the city of Athens, was the champion of the formation of the Delian League, and it was formed in response to the threat from Persia. But Athens ran this league, and they rejuvenated the cult of Apollo as a way of sort of promoting and marketing a kind of sense of Ionian unity. So Delos is that island down there in the Aegean. It's an Ionian island, but Apollo is also connected with Delphi, which is a mainland site and a very sort of a unified a site where a lot of city-states come and worship. They have different temples there. So Athens was able to sort of take this particular religious discourse and co-opt it for political purposes. We call that propaganda. And that's something you can't derive from the hymn itself. Okay, our next topic is the hymn to Demeter, which we'll be reading next. And if Apollo has his temple, his oracle, and a festival at Delphi, Demeter has her temple and festival at Eleusis. And I put the little map up here. You can see Delphi, Athens, and Eleusis. Eleusis is much closer to Athens. It's also closer to Corinth, another major city. So it's much more metropolitan. It's closer to larger centers of population. But this gives us a kind of a connection, I think. We've got one hymn to a god who's connected with a specific festival and temple. And you'll see, I think, as you read the hymn to Demeter, that it is also ideological. It's also about the foundation of that particular temple and festival. But there is a difference as well. And there are really sort of two main differences here. One is Apollo is connected with the oracle. That's the main thing that we think of when we think of Delphi. There is a festival, but mainly when people think Delphi, they think the oracle. Demeter, the temple of Demeter at Eleusis, is mainly connected with the mysteries. So it's much more focused on a particular religious ceremony. And that gives us a kind of a different flavor. The other thing to think about is the fact that Apollo is a god and Demeter is a goddess. So if, as we have seen, religious discourse in the period is about order and disorder, we need to start thinking about gender within that context of order and disorder. So those are two things I'll ask you to think about as you read the hymn to Demeter.